Hey YouTube, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be building a website in Ruby, and we're going to use this gem called Sinatra, which lets you build websites in just a few lines of code and in one file. Whenever we're done, we're going to get to see this to-do list app, and we're going to have it to where you can use a Postman, which is another application, to send information and create your own custom to-do list. So let's jump into that. We're in here in VS Code. We're going to create a new directory and do website. We'll then create a new file, app.rb, and in here is going to be our code. Before we jump into that, let's create a new gem file. Actually, let's do this a different way and do it via bundler. So I have a terminal in here in VS Code. We're going to go into our website directory, and if we do bundle init, then it'll create that new gem file for us with a couple of lines. We really need this one to go out to Ruby gems. We don't care about the gem source for Git, but we do need to install Sinatra. So this is going to be the primary way that we're going to build this web server and website. So let's do a bundle in this directory, and it installs Sinatra for us. It's really good practice to specify what version you're using. That way, if you come back to this in a few months, you don't overwrite everything and it gets broken. So I like to capture that after it gets installed. So now that we have that, we need 4 lines of code. So we'll require Sinatra, and then we'll do get slash for the homepage root, and then we'll just output hello world. And then if we come down here to the bottom and type Ruby and then app.rb, which is what we named our file, looks like we have on localhost 4567. If we visit that in our web browser, then we see hello world, which is great. We're all the way there to hosting a website. Let's make this a little bit nicer though. And instead of just rendering a string, we'll render a view. And we'll call this views, this new directory. Create a new file in here called index.erb. Excuse me. In here, we will create an h1 tag. So this is going to be HTML rendered, and ERB is going to embed Ruby into it, so we can change it dynamically. We won't do that right away, but if we do hello world and close our h1 tag with the right syntax, and then we come back over here, instead of hello world, we'll do ERB colon and index, and that should render for us. But we need to restart our server. So we'll kill it with a Control-C and rerun it, app.rb. If we go back over here, refresh, we should see it as an h1 tag and have a little bit bolder of a font and a little bigger. So that's exactly what we see. If we want to do something a little dynamic here to show you that the cool thing about having this be an ERB file is we could do time.now, and if we again restart our server, refresh the page, then we see that this time will change whenever we refresh, which is pretty cool. So now we have a template that's being rendered, and what we'd like to do is have a to-do list. So if we have to-dos, let's do this really basic right now and have it be a string of our first to-do. Now, if we come back over here and we have an unordered list, and we'll close it, we'll want to do embedded Ruby again, and note that I'm not using the equal sign. If you use the equal sign, it will output, but I don't want to do that right now. I want to loop over each of the to-do items and I want to output those. So let's end that statement. And typing. Now we want to do the equal sign with the syntax and do to do. So now we're looping over each of our to-do items and we're just outputting the content there. Our content is just a string. So if we stop our server, restart it, then we can refresh and we see our first to-do, which is great. Now we need to make some kind of a model to contain this, and we want to be able to add to-do items, probably using a post endpoint. In order to do that, we'll need to go back to our gem file and add a few more dependencies. So we're going to add SQLite as a database so that we can have state in between our calls, because HTTP is not a stateful framework. And so we have to save all of that information somewhere. Typically this is in a database. So for the database, we'll use SQLite 3, and that will be saved on a file just on our folder structure here, instead of installing something like Postgres or MySQL. We will install Rake in order to be able to migrate the database and create it ourselves on the command line. We'll also need to bring in ActiveRecord, both Sinatra ActiveRecord, as well as just ActiveRecord. And we want to require both of these. So we'll say require and whatever the thing is. Cool. So now we should also include a nice thin web server. This will help with having fast development. So let's install that as well. That is about it. So let's kill our server, do bundle update. And this will install all those dependencies for us. I won't go through and add all the versions right now, but I will do that before pushing this up to GitHub, just as a best practice to keep those versions so we don't overwrite them when we come back to this in a few months. So what we need now is to require our Sinatra ActiveRecord so that we can use those. We'll need to set our database using this curly syntax, adapter, and our adapter is going to be SQLite 3. Our database is going to be stored in a file under the DB directory and call it development.sqlite. Alright, that sets up our database. We'll need to create a new file called a Rake file. And in that, we'll need to require our app. And we'll also need to require Sinatra ActiveRecord Rake. And I believe that's everything. Yeah, that's everything we need here. That's everything we need here. So let's create our database. So in the command line down here, we'll type rake-t to output all of our different commands we can use, and also make sure Rake works. So the first one we're going to do is rake db create. This will create our database. So let's bring it up here, db create. And this should create a new file underneath the DB directory. So make sure that that happens and is successful. We also want to create a migration. So create migration. This takes a name. So we'll call this create to-dos table. And this should, oh, I'm using the wrong syntax. Let's see, what is it again? db create migration. So it's db create migration with that name. And this should be happier with this. All right, this is gonna create this file underneath db migrate. And it gives us one function, and we'll need to override this with our create table. And this is the table name. We're gonna call it to-dos. And then that's gonna take a table with our block. And then, let's not call it table, let's call it T. And it's gonna have a string with the content of the to-do. And then I always like to create timestamps, which will create 2 new columns, created at and updated at. That lets you know when something's been created and when something's been updated last. So it's a nice tracking mechanism for different database tables, which I really appreciate. Now we're gonna go back over to ActiveRecord and we'll do todo.all, and we'll need to create a model to wire it up to ActiveRecord in our database. So we'll do models to do, and we don't have this yet. So create a new folder, models, and a new file underneath that called todo.rb. And this is gonna be pretty basic. It's gonna be a class called todo. It's gonna inherit from ActiveRecord : base. And that's it. Not gonna have anything inside of it, which is the magic of ActiveRecord and Ruby, so that we don't have to define all the different attributes. Like we don't have to define a content method here. We just get it for free, which is really cool. So now that we have all of this set up, we should be able to run our, let's see, we have a migration, but we have not created that yet. So let's do Rake db migrate, and that'll actually create our table in our database. And this looks good, this is successful. We don't have any records in our database. So if we run ruby app.rb again, then we go to our browser, we don't see any to-do items, which is fine. Let's create a way to put those in the database now. So post, we'll just do the same endpoint. Now we want to say to-do create, and this will have some content, which is how we defined it in the database. And we'll say a great to-do item. And at the end of it, we don't want to render a new view. We just want to redirect back to /, which will present this information back to us. Now to do a post, we can't use the web browser. We have to use a different app. The app I really like to use is called Postman. I'll put a link in the show notes. This is a really awesome app to let you do HTTP requests. What I like to do is encapsulate those inside of a collection. So this will be to-do app. And inside of to-do app, we will create a new request. And we'll call this add to-do item. It's going to be a post, which is the typical HTTP verb when creating something. And we want to use localhost 4567. And if we do that, then we should be able to send if our server's running. I don't remember if we restarted it. Let's restart it. And that should be good. That should have our new post endpoint. And if we post, we should see, looks like a 303, which is fine. And we'll come back over here, refresh, and looks like we have a pound sign. Okay. What went wrong here? Oh, right. We have to go into index.erb and call the content on here. Otherwise, it's not going to do what we expect it to. So let's restart our server just for good measure. Go back over here, refresh. And now we see a great to-do item, which is awesome. So we've hooked up a database and we can do this as many number of times through Postman as we want. So if we send another one, we should see 2 here if we refresh the page, which is what we do. All right. Now let's make this a little bit more dynamic. And instead of having a hard-coded string, let's pull the information off of the params, and we'll name it content. And this in Postman, either you can do params here or you can modify it in the header. Either way, content is what we want to call it. And the best to do item is what we want to add now. We'll send that. And I didn't restart my server. Let's see if I need to. Yes, I do need to. So let's go back here, restart. And now if we do that same process and send and refresh the page, we see the best to do item. And if we see another one, yet another to do. So we'll send that and we see it. All right. So from here, we have a working website. We can dynamically add to-do messages, which is awesome. Now let's make this a little bit more beautiful. So let's create a layout file, which is going to be layout.erb. This will get rendered first and bring in Bootstrap, so like some nice CSS, and we'll add a couple of custom CSS methods, and I'll grab that. This will be available on GitHub, so feel free to pull this down. I don't want to type all this. This is just a lot of syntax that is bringing in the different style sheets for fonts and also for our custom CSS. We're gonna render the same page here under the yield. So yield is gonna render the index ERB that we're familiar with. We're also gonna need to create a new folder that is public and style sheets, and underneath that we'll have custom CSS. And I'm just going to copy this real quick that I've already put together, just bringing in a different font family and adding a footer. So we have all that set up. We also want to make our index ERB file a little nicer, so I'm going to copy that from over here. And we'll get rid of our H3 tag that had our hello world with the timestamp. And we're going to bring in cards and make it look pretty nice for a to-do list. So if we restart our server, which is critical here, we've added a lot of style sheets and layouts and everything. If we refresh the page, we now see that header, which is from our layout, the footer, which is from our layout, and this is dynamic because it just grabs the current year and puts it there. And then these are all our to-do items. So if we added another one, not a static to-do, we'll send that, refresh, and we see that show up. All right, that's everything that I wanted to show for today. This is really powerful and awesome to be able to create a whole web server inside one file and have it render and connect a database. So I hope you learned something. If you did, please like and subscribe on this video. And if you'd like to buy me a coffee, I love coffee. I have that link in the show notes. Have a great day, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks.